Today, the United States operates the world's largest economy, a globally deployed military, and a deeply embedded cultural influence. But less than 250 years ago, there was no United States. There were exactly 13 British colonies situated along the eastern edge of a largely undeveloped continent. In the 1700s, Britain maintained one of the most capable empires on Earth. But after fighting and defeating France in the 7 Years' War, the British government found itself dealing with enormous debt. To balance their finances, Parliament looked across the Atlantic to its increasingly prosperous American colonies. Britain passed a series of new taxes on items like paper, legal documents, and tea. The colonists, who operated their own local governments and businesses, refused to pay taxes to a parliament located thousands of miles away, where they held no political representation. The political arguments escalated in 1773, when angry colonists boarded British ships and threw an enormous shipment of tea directly into Boston Harbor. In response, Britain aggressively punished the city to force the local population back into obedience. The punishment had the opposite effect. Instead of scaring the colonists into submission, the heavy-handed response pushed the 13 individual colonies to work together. By 1775, the local economic disputes turned into armed conflict, initiating the American Revolution. The colonists were taking on a global superpower. Britain deployed professional soldiers, a massive naval fleet, and heavy funding. The Americans fielded an improvised army of farmers, merchants, and volunteers led by George Washington. Washington lost a significant number of battles, but he understood his primary strategic advantage. He did not need to completely destroy the British military. He only needed to keep his own army intact long enough to exhaust Britain's resources and political will. The Americans eventually secured critical assistance from France. The French supplied weapons, funding, professional soldiers, and naval support. This foreign intervention tipped the scales, allowing Washington to trap a British army at Yorktown in 1781 and force a surrender. Britain officially recognized the independence of the United States in 1783. The new nation possessed a weak central government, limited infrastructure, and a small population. That it sat directly on the edge of a massive, resource-rich landmass. This animated map shows the original borders of the United States, followed by its rapid expansion. In 1803, the government paid France roughly $15 million for the Louisiana Territory. This single purchase nearly doubled the size of the country, providing immediate access to vast stretches of farmland, timber, and navigable rivers. As the borders pushed westward, the map shows the human cost of this expansion. The government removed native nations from their ancestral lands through warfare and treaties, forcibly relocating thousands along routes like the Trail of Tears, where many died during the journey. As the nation expanded its territory, a severe internal division threatened to split the country. The northern states built an economy based on urbanization and industry. The southern economy relied almost entirely on agriculture, driven by the labor of enslaved people. By 1861, decades of political compromises failed. Southern states left the Union, starting the Civil War. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers died as the country fought itself. A conflict President Abraham Lincoln ultimately focused on the total abolition of slavery. The Confederacy surrendered in 1865, and slavery was permanently abolished. The conflict exacted a horrific toll in human lives and destroyed entire cities, but it left the United States operating as a single, highly centralized nation prepared for rapid economic expansion. After the war, the domestic economy exploded. Companies built railroads across the continent, factory outputs multiplied, steel production increased rapidly, commercial oil was discovered, and electricity powered growing urban centers. To run this industrial machine, the nation required immense labor. Millions of immigrants arrived from Ireland, Germany, Italy, Eastern Europe, Asia, and beyond, taking jobs in the factories, mines, and construction sites. Industrialists like Henry Ford looked at this growing workforce and saw a new consumer market. Cars already existed, but they were expensive luxury items. Ford wanted to manufacture vehicles that ordinary workers could actually afford to buy. He instituted the moving assembly line in his factories. Instead of a single worker building an entire car, the vehicle moved along a track while workers repeated specific individual tasks. The process drastically reduced both the time and cost of manufacturing at scale. When World War I devastated Europe, the United States entered late and emerged with its factories intact and its banks wealthy. This triggered a massive economic boom in the 1920s, heavily reliant on consumer goods, which came to a sudden halt with the stock market crash of 1929 and the subsequent Great Depression. To stop the economic collapse, President Franklin Roosevelt implemented the New Deal. The federal government aggressively expanded its role in the economy, creating jobs, building public infrastructure, and regulating banks to stabilize the nation. The country initially stayed out of the fighting when World War II erupted in Europe. That isolationism ended on December 7, 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, forcing the United States into a global conflict. The government immediately directed the domestic economy toward wartime production. Car factories started building tanks, and commercial manufacturers switched to aircraft parts and warships. The United States produced enough material to arm its own military while simultaneously supplying the Allied nations. When the war ended in 1945, Europe and Japan were heavily devastated. The United States emerged with its industrial infrastructure largely untouched, enormous financial reserves, and a monopoly on nuclear weapons. The only remaining rival power was the Soviet Union. The two nations held completely opposing political and economic systems. Instead of direct military conflict, they fought the Cold War through espionage, proxy wars, and a race for technological superiority. When the Soviets launched the first satellite and the first human into space, it created widespread panic in the United States. The government accelerated its aerospace programs, culminating in the 1969 Apollo 11 mission that put American astronauts on the moon. Decades of navigating global conflicts and existential threats had forced the country to continually align its industrial base with its military needs, creating an armed force capable of projecting power anywhere on Earth. Following World War II, the United States helped construct a new international economic system, with the dollar acting as the central currency. At the same time, American movies, music, and consumer brands spread globally, exporting the country's culture and ideas to foreign audiences. By the late 20th century, American companies began driving the digital revolution. Businesses focused on computers, the internet, and software expanded the economy beyond physical manufacturing and established the country as a global technology leader. The Cold War concluded abruptly. The Soviet economy struggled to maintain its massive military spending, and in 1991, the Soviet Union officially collapsed. The United States remained as the sole global superpower. There was no single factor that built this level of global dominance. It required 250 years of continuous geographic expansion, mass immigration, rapid industrialization, wartime mobilization, and cultural export, all layering on top of one another. But historical records show that the nations dominating the globe eventually fall from their positions. With new countries rapidly developing their own massive economies and advanced militaries, the question moving forward is exactly how long the United States can maintain its place at the top.